Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 333 How Doubt Plagues the Mind, Part 3. Understanding the full breadth of the damage of doubt. The podcast objectives are analyze the full impact of despair, distrust, and self reliance. This lesson contains timelines and other visuals. Therefore, if you are listening to the podcast, I advise you to watch the video version on our website or YouTube, or request a PDF of the lesson so you can add the visual effect. The full impact of despair. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 66 of our exposition of lawlessness. In the most recent podcast, we analyzed the downfall of those who incur a spiritual stronghold of despair, distrust, and self-reliance, i.e., the 3 degrees of doubt. In this podcast, we will take it a step further. Vis-a-vis, we will analyze the full impact of these 3 degrees in our minds, and we will do so using visuals. I will show you the progression of doubt in your mind so you can see exactly what is happening, beginning with despair. As I said before, despair manipulates your emotions to negatively impact your feelings, but it doesn't stop there. Not at all. The damage despair does within your thought dimension progresses well beyond your emotions and your feelings. You can see this by observing the image to the right. To wit, despair manipulates your physical perspective and all the shapes in this diagram which have a red border around them. In the case of your physical perspective, the better word for the damage done might be distort as opposed to manipulate. For your physical perspective, for all intents and purposes, remains intact. Nevertheless, you still have an immense problem on your hands. Vis-a-vis, your physical perspective will no longer reflect reality. Here is why. Even if your experiences should override your emotions and or your voice of reason purges your second thought, creating an accurate mental summary, that mental summary will yet be compromised due to your distorted physical perspective. Now, as problematic as this development is, it doesn't automatically spell gloom and doom in every case. That's because despair plagues men and women differently. Vis-a-vis, the impact of despair upon your personality is largely contingent to your default composition. On this wise, some men and women are more desperate than others by nature, and thus despair will have a greater impact in their mind, which is why the progression of doubt does not end with despair. Quite the contrary, despair progresses to distrust, an even more formidable weapon formed against us. Nonetheless, this is the impact of despair. And yet, the damage of doubt is not finished. The damage of doubt is not done. The full impact of distrust. Now, whereas despair compromises a fraction of our thought dimension, distrust deals our thought dimension a death blow. To wit, distrust compromises every component and actor of our thought dimension, save two: our senses and our conscience. You can see this by observing the image to the right. To wit, distrust compromises all the shapes in this diagram which have a red border around them, which were not compromised by despair. Let's analyze this troubling development from the beginning. Vis-a-vis, distrust enters the thought dimension once despair has established its stronghold. Now, once distrust enters your thought dimension, it has multiple options as to where and how it can begin establishing its correlating stronghold. As the saying goes, all the world's in play. Notwithstanding, distrust by design immediately begins plaguing your physical and spiritual thought processes. This is where it intends to establish its stronghold. And here is why this is so problematic. Your thought processes feed into your CPU, and your CPU is the engine of the mind, i.e., the mind is only able to produce an informed thought because of the processing power of your CPU, for it processes every form of stimuli that enter the mind. Here lies the problem. Vis-a-vis, your CPU is agnostic to the input it receives. It doesn't vet the input for accuracy, and it doesn't determine the quality of the data. My dear friends, for better or worse, your CPU simply receives the input and initiates the core functions of the thought dimension. Therefore, if your CPU receives garbage as input, it will generate garbage as output. As the saying goes, garbage in, garbage out. Now, if your CPU is corrupted with bad data, your impressions will also be corrupted, for your impressions will evolve from the bad data passed on to it by your CPU, compromising another layer of your thought dimension. Next, if your impressions are corrupted from the bad data received from your CPU, your feelings will be further corrupted. The key word is further, for your feelings are already corrupted due to the manipulation of your emotions via your personality, which at this juncture is being governed by despair. To make matters worse, there is a new trouble encountered at this juncture. To wit, a critical issue we did not encounter in the first phase of doubt when our personalities were hijacked by despair. Consider this, my friends, and beware. By corrupting our spiritual thought processes, distrust also compromises our spiritual perspective, which in turn compromises our reality, which in turn compromises our experiences. Here lies the problem. Namely, if we do not possess an accurate view of our experiences, then we cannot possibly possess honest and accurate feelings to develop an informed thought. Listen to me. This is crucial because the intersection between our emotions, feelings, and experiences is not only one of the most critical junctures in our thought dimension, but it is also one of the junctures that despair did not conquer. To our good fortune and for a thrill of hope, this is one of the phases in our thought dimension that yet had the power and potential to overcome and bypass despair. But alas, what despair could not do, distrust will do. And it is one of the greatest inside jobs we will ever experience in our lives. Just think about it. In one turn, distrust compromises our spiritual perspective, our reality, and our experiences. A most demoralizing trifecta, as it were. Now, all these setbacks are supremely devastating, but none are as devastating as the corruption of your reality. For your reality is the heart of your spiritual mind. And ultimately, your reality is the prized possession distrust is looking to steal. Here is why. If your reality is compromised, your entire thought dimension will eventually be compromised. It is the one major actor that has this testimony. The reason why this is the case is sure, and you can come to it by considering the diagram to the right. Along these lines, your conscience is the only primary actor who is not compromised by despair or distrust. Besides providing health to your spiritual thought processes, your conscience works with the truth within your reality to empower your experiences to positively affect your feelings. No doubt, this is the opposite work despair executes within your physical mind. And it is why despair will not always find success in its counter operations, specifically with someone who follows their conscience and has a good grip on reality. But alas, not everyone follows their conscience, and thus, not everyone has a good grip on reality. As such, here lies the problem, and I will share it as an inflection point. This is one I advise you to bookmark. When distrust compromises your reality, your conscience loses its sidekick in protecting the sanctity of your experiences. As a result, your experiences will be neutralized, allowing your personality and your emotions to control the generation of all your thoughts, ensuring they reflect your doubts and not your faith. On this wise, your first thought will reflect your worst emotions and an incomplete at best summary of your experiences. And in the worst cases, your interpretation of your experiences could be completely inaccurate, deriving from a false reality painted by a perspective of distrust. Not only this, but as you have learned in prior podcasts, upon generating your first thought, the process will progress to the stage of reason, as you can see by the diagram to the right. And whereas in times past, this juncture would have been the final checkpoint, the last stop to make sure the thought process is consistent with the senses, it will not be. Alas, the thought generation process has been broken. The stage of reason in this development will not be found. Your train of thought will look to pull into the station, a station that has always been in the same location in the past, and yet it is nowhere to be found. Here is why. By manipulating your thought processes, distrust has silenced your voice of reason. Therefore, upon generating a first thought, your CPU will not progress to generate a second thought, for there will be no reason. And thus, it will move to create a corrupted mental summary that will feed into your perspective and harden the corruption that has permeated your mind. Alas, this is the impact of distrust. And yet, the damage of doubt is not finished. The damage of doubt is not yet done. The full impact of self reliance. Now, this brings us to self reliance, the critical degree of doubt, and a key matter you must consider concerning the evolution of all the degrees of holiness and lawlessness. This is another one I would have you to bookmark. The critical degree is the inevitable aftermath of the activation of the fundamental and focal degrees. Ergo, the activation of despair and distrust will dynamically result in self reliance. For this cause, there is only one notable change in the landscape of the thought dimension once an individual progresses from distrust to self reliance. To wit, your personality is transformed into an ulterior version known as self. Turn the diagram to the right. You can clearly see how self is in the place where your personality used to be. Now, not only has self feloniously replaced your personality, but it is also much larger than your personality was. This is a testament to its influence within your thought dimension at this point and the impact self has in strengthening despair and distrust, which are also highlighted in the diagram. It goes without saying that at this point in the development, there is no hope of recovery or salvation outside of the spirit of Elohim. For look, a mind in this position is a mind that is in the worst position it could ever be in. My dear friends, this is as bad as it could possibly get. I would ask you to take a few moments to look at this diagram, really consider it, and consider how everything that is highlighted in red has been compromised by distrust, despair, and self reliance. As you can clearly see, every part of your mind is being controlled by doubt, except for two: your senses and your conscience. Brothers and sisters, we have now reached the end of this disastrous cycle. This is the impact of self reliance and the great damage of doubt. Now, here is the final word. The battles we fight with doubt are hard, and thus you must be on your guard. I understand this is not a feel good message, and yet this is the message Yahuwah has given me to share with you in this hour. Remember, we are here to obtain the seal of Elohim, and thus this is no time to pat ourselves on the back for all the good we think we're doing, or for all the good we have already done. Brothers and sisters, this is a time to examine ourselves and to prove that we are indeed men and women of faith. And that starts with ensuring that we are free of doubt. Stay with me, and I will begin sharing a brighter message, next week as we begin examining how we can wield the power of faith to defeat the plague of doubt. And yet, that word of truth will be of no value to you if you fail to receive the word I have already shared. Trust me, you must appreciate and understand doubt for what it is, for this will be the determining factor on how you will fare. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on the word you have heard today. And as always, ask the Father to reveal the truth to you. For the children of Elohim live by conviction. And if he has not convicted you, or if you had not heard him concerning these matters, you should pray until you do. Today, I want you to meditate on all the material we covered. There is a lot for you to consider on these matters. And so that's all I would ask of you today. Think on these things and be led by the Spirit in your conclusions. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 333, How Doubt Plagues the Mind, Part 3. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 334, A Call to Finish His Work. I will post this podcast on Friday, September 6th, 2024. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch, continue to pray, continue in fasting, and most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming. The end is near.